Right. Well, some people had good grades, some people had bad grades. Generally, 5 or 6 points, I think. So I don't know. I mean, we'll have 2 or 3 more pop quizzes, and I will. If we do 3, I will choose 2 of the best. Okay. So 2 best grades, and that will count for 30% of your grade. If we do 4 tests, we'll choose 3 of the best, so you have more chances. So even if you did badly this time, study hard, and then you get better chance. Quizzes only count for 30%. The rest is a big long paper, term paper. So don't worry, but you sort of understand how I grade. The answer is pretty obvious. Which statement below will be false according to E.H. Carr? This was from the first class. Facts speak for themselves. They don't speak for themselves. You choose facts and you interpret facts. They don't have a story in themselves. So if you read the quote that I quote in the first class, so A is wrong, it's false. What is the main goals of occupation? Demilitarization, democratization, obviously. Circle the events that are in chronological order. It's creation of the SDF 1955, and the U.S. Security Division 1960s, and then Kishi resigns, and then Hayato comes, and then income doubling plan. So B. Which is not the cause of high growth era? Expensive oil. It was cheap. That was one of the reasons why there was such growth. What was the crisis and compensation strategy? Well, B doesn't make much sense. It's A. Opposition parties never came to power in Japan. It was the LDP, then there's a crisis such as, I don't know, environmental crisis, environmental pollution issues, or more directly, the opposition to the U.S. Security Treaty in the 60s. It happens, all kinds of tension, riot, protests, and then Kishi resigns, and then what do? A new prime minister comes and says, let's not worry about these ideological things or security issues. It's so divisive. Let's focus on growing the economy. And so the focus was on growing the economy, lifting GDP. That was a kind of a compensation technique. Okay, the essays are a bit more difficult. I mean, there's no correct answer. I try to judge on whether, first of all, what you're writing is correct, historically accurate. Another is whether you're writing between the 1950 and 1972. Some people are writing about the bubble period or car makers exporting to U.S. and then tensions. This is after much later period. These were some of the answers that I was looking for that was discussed in the classes. Who benefited, who lost for the first one? One would say farmers who gained their plots of land, citizens whose political rights, civil rights defended by the Constitution, generally a normal class society, so better opportunities for normal citizens. Women's rights, obviously, women gets to vote. U.S. benefited, right? How? Well, they have bases in Japan, they have allies in Japan. They create an ally in Japan, they create stability, so that helps them in their strategy in East Asia overall as well. Japan in general, you could say, but then you should be more specific. Some people say Japan, the Japanese public, but that's too vague. But in net, one could say that Japan benefited because it gained peace and stability and economic growth. A lot of it as a result of occupation. Japanese emperor, everybody said the emperor lost. Well, the people lost because the emperor lost his position as a living god. You can also argue that the emperor and the imperial family benefited because they were not tried. They were not put to trial for war crimes. They were not executed, so they survived. He gained his life. There was a chance he could have been killed. So we could say he benefited, he won. Or we could say he lost because he lost his status, he lost his power. Landowners, obviously, the military, pre-war elites and bureaucrats who are seen as instigating the war, they lost a lot of power. The oligarchs, the aristocracy, conservatives and traditionalists who wanted Japan to have its own constitution, who wanted Japan to have its own military. Obviously, their goals were not achieved because the U.S. occupation said no more military, use this constitution. So. Emperor, yes, emperor might have to, depending on how you argue. There's no correct answer. I wanted you to kind of explain what does it mean to lose, win, and give a logic within 3-5 sentences. The second question, more people asked to answer this question. A bit more complicated, but I'm looking for answers that explain how economic growth was both a benefit but also created tensions. And after the tensions were created, further economic growth was used to calm down, reduce tension, to spread more wealth around. I just gave you that example in the very beginning. Obviously, in 1960 and 1961, the switch, all this discussion about the left-right divide, the conflict over the U.S. Security Treaty, Article 9, change of constitution, the LDP faced a lot of protests, a political crisis. After that, they said, let's not worry about this, let's focus on economic growth. And the compensation was, if we focus our energies here, you'll get wealthier. And that's what happened between 1960 and 70. Rural-urban tensions occurred, very rapid industrialization and rapid urbanization means the farmers, their wealth grew slower than those who lived in the cities. And a lot of people had to go and live in the big cities, so there's more tension. So what did the LDP do? The compensation was to use more economic growth and use that and redistribute it to the countryside. Talked about the rice and steel coalition, right? It was to exchange between these two sides and balance it out. Environmental pollution is obviously caused by massive, rapid economic growth. Eventually, through local governments, the LDP and the Japanese government responded, and regulated more, and also, I guess, spent money passed regulations to control this kind of economic growth. Massive urbanization, you've got urban problems, problems of overcrowding or lack of parks or lack of welfare for those workers who are now living in cities. This was compensated by expanded welfare, 1965, 1970, around that time. Okay? So the end of this period. So these are the kind of ideas I was looking for. Some people had some different arguments, which I thought were good. Then I gave them some points. Some people had an argument, but it was totally false or unclear. I didn't give it. I noticed that some people just wrote what they knew, not what they heard in class, or what they read in the textbook. It could be correct, but that's not enough. You have to show that you've read the textbook and you've listened to class. Okay? So if you have any questions about how it's graded, you can come back to me. As I said, this is not the end of the world. You have 2 or 3 more quizzes to improve. And it's only 30% of your grade. Main thing is come to class and don't come late. All right, let me see. There are more people coming in. Don't come late. Exactly, I said. I have to do this again. So Wakayama Hino-san, Rachel Yang, Takeyoshi Koami, Numa Nakai, Azati, Ophir, Azati, Kamaya, Eileen Xie, Koike. This is Koike. Who's Koike? Jose Manuel, Ju Chingue, Nana Yoshino, Wakaya Hino. Did I do that already? Hino-san. Okay, who didn't get their paper back? Do their quiz. What's your name? Yuma. Here you go. Try not to come late. Okay. Any questions on the quiz? Pretty self-evident. Don't say this thinking that you're going to give it to next year's students, because I will change the quiz every year a little bit. Or don't sell it on Yahoo or whatever. I know where people sell the exams. Okay. Happy? So let's go on to today's class, which is called about the lost decades. Who's heard of the lost decades? Who knows what the lost decades are? Who's heard of lost decades? How about the Japanese students? 失われた20年。聞いたことある人手を挙げて。 Okay. Maybe it happened when you were born. You 1995? No. 1996? When were you born? 95? You're 20, right? 97, 98? Wow, 99? Soon 2000? Amazing. I feel old. In Chinese, they have this thing called Ba Ling Ho or something, right? Like Zhou Ling Ho. Like if you're born in the 80s, and 90s, and 2000. Anyway, new generation. You lived through it, the last decades. You're born into it, so you don't know the bubble. You don't know the very wealthy times of Japan, which we talked about last week, right? We talked about when Japan was booming and rich and buying things, and you had takshiken and you can go party in Roppongi and the company will pay for everything. You'll find a job whatever you do. No more. We're talking now about this period afterwards, from 1990. It's the last decades because we're not quite sure when it ends. We know when it starts, about 1990. But we're not quite sure whether it's ended. Are we still stuck in the lost decade? What does it mean? What was lost? It's weird. Yeah? How can you call something a lost period? I mean, you had those years, people were living, people were working, companies and stuff. It's been coined in this blanket phrase, lost decade. Very pessimistic, very negative. Now, I think it seems the situation is improving to some degree. And also because people don't remember how good it was in the 80s. So there's a new normal, this low economic growth, weak job security, salaries don't go up much. So it's a new kind of reality or new balance. But if you compare from historical period, if you compare from before high growth era, oil shock, and then the wealth, and then the bubble period, and then afterwards, it's a clear change. And we can explain all the different things that were lost. Okay, this period is characterized. This period is described. Economic stagnation, obviously. Immobility, contraction. Things are not moving or changing. Economic inequality is growing. Fear and anxiety, worry about job security and about social cohesion. Of course, all of these things existed, and perception, how you feel and think about things, how intellectuals or normal people or newspapers wrote about the time. But this is very heightened after the bubble collapses. And you can ask some questions. What were they? What do you mean when you say lost? What was lost exactly? Who lost it? If you lose something, there must be somebody who loses it, right? Was it inevitable? It's always a difficult question to answer in history. Was Brexit inevitable? Was Trump inevitable? Was Hitler inevitable? Lost decade. Inevitable means what? It means it had to happen. Well, obviously, things have to happen. Take a religious position, but more analytically, what could have been done differently to avoid 20 years of stagnation, 20 years of low growth? Were there policy failure or inaction? Was there something that governments did not do, or was something that governments did do that was not good, made the situation worse? All these things you can analyze over this period. Who should be held responsible? And a single person or a group, or I don't know. Shall we blame somebody? Maybe it's a kind of useless exercise. Okay, so we'll talk about this perception, which is as important as reality. Always remember, perception is as important, sometimes more important than reality. Some would say perception is reality. In politics, in history, any kind of social phenomena, what people think of a thing, how people see a thing, is very, very important. More important than what actually happens. Then we talk more objectively of the economics of the period, and then how that impacted different areas of society. How it impacted the workplace, impacted economic equality, education, and gender. These are very big topics, and I probably won't be able to go through everything. We'll expand into these themes a bit more in the latter half of this class, more specifically looking at things like gender issues, more specifically looking at things like work-life balance, challenges and transport. We'll do a little overview. Maybe I won't finish everything in this class, since I've already spent 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But anyway, that's the idea, today's lecture. Okay? So let's go. All right. Can you see the pictures? What are they? What are these covers? What are they, pictures? The top left here. Who knows? Somebody tell me. I'm going to try and be more interactive because I'm very tired of lecture format. It feels like I'm talking to a wall. There will be no more lectures in 10, 15 years, I think. Hopefully. Why? Because what's the point of a lecture, right? They should record me doing it once and then do it online. You can watch it on YouTube 100 million times. Why do I have to come up here and talk? In addition, lectures, you read the book, you read things, it's much faster. The point of lecture is sort of like repeating what you can read. Unless you ask questions, unless we interact, I feel like lecture is a waste of time. It's an old system, lecture. It's when there was books were expensive, or no books, there was no internet, and the idea that you have to memorize and learn new things, best done by sitting in class. So I'm anti-lecture. So I'll ask you questions and you'll try and answer. What's this? What are these two things here? The red. What does it say? Somebody speak to me. Yes, sir.
Seems like to first the economy.
Very good.
Is linked to
Louder.
if you read the title, Japan's amazing ability to disappoint the southern Japan.
Yeah.
They relate with the narrative of the late Japan that's keeping on shrinking the economy.
Yeah.
The population being southern.
Yeah. Very good. So this is a magazine called The Economist. It's a very, very good magazine. Sometimes I disagree with the politics, but it's a very, very good global newspaper. Of course, it's a newspaper, but it comes out every week. Okay. I used to work there as an intern for just a year or half a year. Anyway, they are a very influential magazine. Economist, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal. If you're going to be a leader in the world, if you're elite, you read it. Okay? Don't read the Japan Times. Well, maybe you do, but anyway, not to make fun of some newspaper. This is from the 1998 and 2002, and the title is, as the gentleman there explained, very, very pessimistic. Okay? Back then, there were all these pessimistic. Oh, Japan is down. Japan sucks. Japan is sliding. Japan is drifting. There's no leadership. There's no growth. It's all going down the drain. Okay? You can say it's a jigyaku, not jigyaku, but shikan teki. Jigyaku shikan is when you do it to yourself, but outside of Japan, there's a lot of pessimism. Flag falling, the sumo wrestler shrinking. Japan is not Japan. What's this? Let's see here. Japan. Terrible. If you're a nationalist, you'll get angry. You'll do a kogi. Right? For the Abe government, it's kogi. What? Why? Well, we have to explain what was happening in Japan at the time. There's a perception that Japan is not really working. And the phrase, lost decades, it starts to become common expression used in the media. It first came around in 1999, 8, I think Newsweek magazine, to talk about what? Asset bubble bursting and banks unable to deal with bad loans and deflation in the economy. It was talking about the financial sector, mainly about banking. The banks in the end of the bubble, after the bubble, they had lots of bad loans, okay? Because the land prices collapsed. They had, and a lot of their loans were tied to real estate, of course, the stock market. So the idea was the banks spent 10 years not doing the right things to clear off their debts, and so we lost opportunity. But then it became not just about the banking sector, but about Japan generally. Economy, society, education, tradition, middle class society, lost. All these things were lost. It get bigger and bigger. After, especially around 2009, 2010, 2011, well, 2011 especially was maybe 20 years since the bubble burst, but this term became, again, rediscovered. And there are books written in English, Japan's lost decade. So people were like, when is it going to end? Why 2011? Well, you had a major earthquake. It seemed like the world was coming to an end. You had a nuclear problem, nuclear accident. The DPJ, the Minchito government was chaotic. Things weren't working, totally leaderless. A mess. Okay. Well, the period starts in 1989, and it's pretty clear. It's not just, because the Nikkei stock exchange and the real estate market start crashing in about 99. 89, you have death of Emperor Showa, so change in the Nengo and change in period. Also, around the world, you have big events. 1989, Berlin Wall collapses, Cold War ends, Soviet Empire disintegrates, all these things. Beginning is clear, but when does it end? Because if you look at the statistics, the macroeconomic statistics, you can see that the economy did quite well in 2002 to 2008 compared to other countries. Okay? So why are we talking about lost decades when there was 3-4% growth average? Maybe a bit less under Koizumi. But from the standpoint of 2010, 11, 12, 13, it was really quite pessimistic. Now it's more optimistic. Abe-san came again, he was like Super Abe, like Superman, the cover of the Economist, he's wearing a Superman cape. Who's that? It's Super Abe, right? He's going to rescue Japan with Abenomics, he's going to rescue Japan with all these new policies. Some kind of optimism back then. So we don't talk so much about lost decades nowadays. For a while, people were saying, oh, still Japan is in a third decade, deflation continuing, economy is not so successful. Okay? So you understand this periodization. When something starts, historical period starts, and it's not always clear. It's debatable. Okay. So, what was lost during this period, 1990 to 2010? You give me some things that you think were lost. Tell me. If you have read your textbook, you would all be going, yes, Ichino-san. Yes.
Like fast-growing economy was lost?
Fast-growing economy, yes. So before 1990, GDP growth was about 4 or 5%. It slows down and becomes almost zero. What else? Economic growth. Well, between 1990 and 2010, 11, 15, and come on. What could you say was lost? Yes? Birth rate, very good. Well, the birth rate fell. So number of babies, I don't know if it's right to say lost, but the population starts to shrink. When was it? 2010? Well, until then, the number of babies and young people are lost. We're not making babies. And the chance to fix this problem and to fix Shoshikoreka, there was a lot of chances. They didn't act, so you lost the opportunity to change this. What else? Yes?
There's like a widening gap between universities.
Widening gap between?
Universities.
What do you mean?
A lot of the universities closed down because there's a lot of students, there's more space for students, but they also live a bit more.
Yeah, I think some universities shut down, you're right. So we have lost the number of young students or university students, so there's shrinking of the university market. Yes?
A lot of people that were speculating on the housing market lost a lot of money.
Good. So not just growth, but if you own property, if you own stock, if you own golf resort memberships, you lost tremendous amount of money. Asset deflation. Okay, what other things? Very good. When did he lose power? When? I don't know. Okay, when did the LDP lose power? Japanese students. Come on. Huh? Hi? Naoto Kan was elected as prime minister. Yes, but before that, Hatoyama Yukio was elected prime minister. But even before that, Jiminto Seiken fell. 杉橋さん、最初に杉橋さん、いつですか？知らんの？ 1993. For 8-9 months, they lose. They come back again. Then they lose again in 2009. So they lose. It could be a gain for the public. Now we have another party in power. Okay, good. What else? How about something less tangible, less concrete?
Like people's enthusiasm to
People enthusiasm. Very good. Or confidence. You could say that people might have lost confidence. This is more difficult to measure. But a sense of security, maybe you do an opinion poll, a survey. 世論調査. Maybe in the 80s, people like, 日本は一流国である。日本の生活に対しての不安が少ない。We're not so worried about our life. After 1990, people's confidence and people's sense of security goes down. It's very important. Very good. We covered another one. Stock market prices fall, estate prices collapse, working age population declines from 1995, total population begins to decline in 2008. Fertility rate, very good, falls. Full-time regular jobs were lost. It used to be much higher. Seiki koyo was much higher. Now seiki is yonwai. Okay, seiki is irregular. That's a big loss. Internal competitiveness, ranking in companies, international ranking of companies, competitiveness fell. Size of companies shrank. Ranking in per capita GDP. What's per capita GDP in Japanese? Hmm? 個人 GDP 一人当たり総生産一人当たりです per capita per person. Okay? That fell. It was third in the world. Now it's 25 in 2015. I think it's gone down. This is a big deal. If you're third in the world and the wealth is spread around, it means you're quite rich. You can go to any country and you're richer than most people. Now you're not richer than most people, okay? Your stature, your position in the global economy. GDP became third largest in the world. Public debts increased, so what you gained was debt. You lose financial solvency. Okay? Debts were 60% of GDP, now it's 230, 250. That's crazy levels. Okay? Lost opportunities for change. This is another thing that you should not just focus on what was actually physically lost, but also opportunity, chance to do something. Leadership and policies failed to carry out reform. One could argue this, or one could argue, no, they had no choice. You can always argue going back, looking back. Oh, I should have done this. Oh, I could have done this. Oh, he should have done this. Oh, he could have done this. It's easy when looking back. It's much more difficult to put yourself in that position 50 years ago, 20 years ago, and think, why was it that I made, or that person or that country made the wrong mistakes? What things that were they not paying attention to? What was the mindset? Now, nobody would ever argue that Japan should bomb Pearl Harbor, right? Unless you're crazy, or unless you're super right-wing. Why? Because 6 years later, Japan was almost destroyed. Well, it was destroyed. It could have ended as a country. You could have had the Russians take over Hokkaido, maybe up to Tohoku, and then divide it into North Japan, South Japan. You have a civil war like South Korea. Could have been a real mess. You're lucky. In other words, looking backwards, you can always say this and that, but I'm going to argue leadership, bureaucrats did not take the right action. All these things, birth rate, getting women into the workplace, into politics, dealing with public debt, dealing with the Nenkin, dealing with medical costs, Okinawa-based issues. You know, the problem with Denmark and Oko started in 1995. That's 22 years ago. Yeah? First agreement with the US and Japan to move the base of Denmark to Henoko was basically 20 years ago. That's a long time. Same problems. The problem about the 地方の過疎化 and the 地方と都市の格差, it's going on for 30, 40 years. Same problem. You go read the newspapers, you read the discussion, same kind of discussion. You wonder why the country never changes. Of course, it's not just Japan. You have similar situations. But this lack of mobility, lack of dealing with structural problems until everything just collapses. Hopefully not, but there's this strange dynamic. Okay. Sounds very pessimistic. I'm sorry, this class is going to be a bit pessimistic. Two people. Do you know who these are? Yes, sir.
Murakami Haruki.
Who's Murakami Haruki? And who's this?
Murakami Ryu.
Yeah. Murakami Ryu. They are both. What's their job? You know? 職業あれだ。何をやってる人ですか？村上龍と村上春樹。Writer, yes. 小説家. Also TV personality now. I have two comments from them on the time. Murakami Ryu says, this country has everything. You can find whatever you want. The only thing you can't find is hope. And then Murakami says, we are lost. We don't know which way to go. But this is a very natural thing, a very healthy thing. So, one is very pessimistic, the other is not pessimistic, saying it's just the lost decade, we're lost. But that means there's a new light, there's a new way. If you're fixed, you know what you want, there's no way of changing. But if you're in a position of confusion and loss, as Japan has been the last 20, 30 years, maybe it means there's room to change. Okay. More pessimism. What other things? Well, all these economic factors and all this change, but along with it, there were some major events, historical events. 1995 was a bad year, so-called Annus Horribilis. Annus Horribilis means bad year in Latin. They had the Kobe earthquake, and they also had the Omu Shindikyo, which is this religious cult that put sarin nerve gas in the subway and killed 20 people, 25 people, damaged a lot of people. This is sort of very, very shocking picture there. Kasumigaseki Station, I don't know. So very, very negative news events that somehow accelerated pessimism. Shocking to imagine. Nowadays, it's like terrorist attacks every weekend. Every weekday, you turn on the news, you say, where's the next terrorist attack? Well, not in Japan. Back then, this was a pretty major urban terrorist attack. Well, I guess not really, because you have IRA and you have all these other terrorist attacks. But in Japan, anyhow. If you had, from this survey, Yoronchosa and Asahi, you ask the people, which period is the most happy period? Or what kind of image do you have? They say that the Showa, Sengo Showa, post-war Showa, is a very happy, very progressive. And after that comes this pre-war Showa, of course, militaristic time, very conservative, very dark, terrible, catastrophic time. But least positive, most people think the worst period, at least from 2009, was Heisei, which is from 1990. So this is quite shocking. What is this? What are the respondents saying? They're saying that 1990 to 2009 is a worse period than pre-war Japan. I would never say that, but it shows how pessimistic people were back then. Okay. Now that's the kind of perception issues. Now let's look in more detail at the actual reality, what was happening. Okay, any questions so far? Anybody want to challenge my layout? Yeah? Okay, let's go ahead. So bubble bursts. Bubble, what's a bubble? It's a real estate bubble where property, so land, stock, financial equity stocks. Let's say that again. Were very highly valued. There was a boom because there was so much easy money from banks. Almost overnight, they all collapsed, as you can see. This is the stock market, Nikkei 18, 1989, boom, came down. In a matter of just a very short time, a year or two, it became a third of the peak price. This, which looks like Mount Fuji, Fujisan, is the price of real estate in the big six big cities in Japan. So, Dosan Kakaku in the big 6 cities. And that also came down very quickly, okay, after 1989. Before this shock, though, Japan was doing very well. We talked about last week. The joke was, after the Berlin Wall fell and the Cold War ended, people were saying, Japan, the Cold War is over, the Soviet Union lost, the communists lost, but who won? The Japanese won. Because the Japanese are doing so well. The Japanese economy is doing so well. They had a trade surplus, they had strong corporate profits, GNP growing at 4%. So 1990, good year, but then suddenly starts to slide down. Helps the stock market, triggered because the bank interest rates were raised in 1989, in the summer of 1990. This is seen as the most immediate cause of this collapse of the bubble. They tightened the fiscal monetary supply too quickly. And stock market valuations half, they become half in less than a year. What you get when you have falling stock prices and land prices, you have borrowers, people who borrow money from the bank, they can't repay their debts because a lot of the money is tied into land, and now the land is half or a third of the value that they bought it for. They can't pay back. You can't sell the land because even if you sell the land, you can only get half or a third. You borrowed 100 million yen, sell the land for 30 million, you still have 70 million. So the bank's holding all these loans that they can't do anything about. So-called non-performing loans. Banks and companies too, they have all these debts that they couldn't get rid of, which means that they can't invest. They don't have extra money to spend on buying new factories or hiring new people, putting into R&D. So the banks, they cannot provide new money to new entrepreneurs, so the economic activity shrinks. Worse, they continue to give money to prevent these bad loan companies from going bankrupt. Construction companies, many of them, so-called zombie companies, because they never die, basically bankrupt. Massive loans, very small or not enough income and revenue. But the banks, they don't want them to go bankrupt. Why? What happens when a company that a bank lends money to goes bankrupt? What happens to the bank? Yes, they have to.
So they cannot pay the people who have put their money into the bank, cannot get their money back.
Well, if the bank goes bankrupt, but if the company that the bank is lending money to goes bankrupt,
they cannot get their money back.
Yeah, they can't get the loan back. They have to hold the loan. They have to get the loan, so they have a minus in their books. So rather than allowing the bad companies to go bankrupt, they keep on giving extra money to these bad companies. Zombie company. And so you have on the stock market companies that share price is 100 yen, or 90 yen, 80 yen. It used to be 3,000 yen. If you have a share price of 100 yen or 90, 80 yen, it means that you're basically bankrupt. Now you have very few companies at that valuation. This is a sign that nobody wants to buy the share because it's basically that. So overall, growth slows, and the financial crisis spills into the rest of the economy, mainly because the banks in the banking sector isn't working effectively. There are other factors too, slowing demand, slowing consumption, all these other factors. Eventually, the banks, under the weight of all these bad loans, they collapse. You have Sanyo Ginko, Choki Shinyo Ginko, 1997, 1998, the bank goes under. It's sort of like the Lehman shock, okay, or the Asian financial crisis. Major bank goes down. Very, very dangerous, because banks lend to each other. One bank goes down, other banks might follow in chain reaction. The government stepped in, of course, to deal with this one. It has a dramatic effect on business and consumer confidence if a major bank goes down. It's a systemic problem. It took a very long time until the banks were able to deal with this. Real size. Real sign. Bad loan. Okay? So it's just a chart from the Ministry of Finance showing the level of bad real sign among banks. It took a long time. It took about 2005 until the level came down. In order to be, and if you have a lot of debt like that weighing over the economy in the corporate sector, it's very difficult to generate new loans, new investments. Okay, so that's the non-performing loans. There are other structural factors for the shrinking Japanese economy at this time. Not shrinking, but slowing. One is, of course, demographic, which is very, very strong now, but household spending, household formation slows down because there are fewer young people, fewer of them are marrying, fewer of them are having children, so there's less demand overall. More of this later. Also, the stronger yen. After 1992, the yen started to strengthen. And although Japan's economy is doing very poorly, the yen, perversely, gets stronger. 85 yen to a dollar, almost like the Mishuto Jidai, or 80 yen for the dollar, almost bottom of the dollar. This, of course, hurts Japanese companies. Why? Because they can't export as effectively, because the yen is expensive. You also have new competitors, new rivals in the world, from Asia and Europe, Eastern Europe, to in consumer electronics, in terms of production of automobiles, too. These are new markets, but there are also competitors coming up from here. And Japanese companies that had limited, almost no rivals, seeing new rivals in Southeast Asia, China, in the latter period, obviously. And faced with these new rivals, Japan couldn't move quickly to change its system to be able to be more competitive. They couldn't shift to new industries or shift to more value added. The shift was weak. Because, why? Well, institutions, labor regulations, labor costs, management practices, it restricted Japanese companies from moving agilely into new markets, or changing strategies. And because Japan is so expensive to make things, because of all these regulations, a lot of Japanese companies moved abroad. More and more companies moved their factories, even their R&D centers, Southeast Asia, China, Europe, US. Yeah. So domestic demand, domestic employment was hurt. There's some figures. Japanese economy and companies, Japan's GDP as the proportion of world GDP shrunk. US shrunk. What countries increased here in terms of global GDP contribution between 2000 and 2012? China and India, Brazil, Russia, and then some other countries, Vietnam, and BRICS. The number of companies listed as the top largest companies in the world, 500 Fortune global list, also shrank. It used to be 28%. companies with Japanese in the Fortune 500. Now it's only 12%. 2013, probably less now. But Japan's global presence in the economy is weakening. So, and then there's some figures from OECD or whatever, the competitiveness of Japanese companies and the Japanese economy has come down. It's picked up recently. I don't think I skipped that slide. Okay, despite this though, despite all this weakening, in 2002 and 2008, you see economy turning around in 2002 and 2008, especially when you calculate it by GDP per capita growth, not GDP overall, but per capita, because Japan's economy is population is not growing as fast as other countries. Aside from Britain, Japan's not doing so badly. Unemployment starts to fall, household income starts to rise a little bit under Koizumi government. What's helping this? China is becoming a major market, end of the bad loans, and then employment practices become more flexible. That is, it's easier to fire and hire. It's easier to employ people as contract workers from around this time. So it sort of moves the economy faster. Then there's new kinds of businesses, mainly telecom, around 2002, for K-Bank, which starts around that time. Which company? SoftBank. KDDI, NTT Communications becomes very big. They weren't that big back then, from this time. Now SoftBank is Japan's second largest company, right? After Toyota. There's only two Juchoen Kigyo, 10 trillion yen. SoftBank, Toyota. So it's, and SoftBank started in 15, 20 years, very rapid. Pharma, consumer finance, leasing, new kind of companies, because of deregulation and more service oriented. So there's a shift, there's a change in Japanese economic structure. So it's kind of a mixed picture. Perception is all negative, or generally negative, but if you look in a bit more detail, you see that it's not all minus. Okay? So you have to be careful. Separate out the perception from the actual changes. All right? So that's a very, very brief overview of what was happening in Japan's economy. And we'll go on and see what happens in the rest of Japan society. How this economic changes impact society and politics, which we'll talk about next week. So what's one of the major themes, which we still talk about today, is job security. Job security in terms of whether you find a job and whether you can keep a job and the quality of the job in general. Because the Japanese companies, big companies are doing poorly, and they cannot invest because they're tied down with bad debts, the economy generally is not growing, they have to force out workers. And because it's so difficult to fire people in the beginning, what they do is they create voluntary retirement, or they find Kowaisha, subsidiary, and they send the employees there. And what used to be a very traditional way of paying, which is Nenko Joretsu. So you're paid according to how many years you work at the company. It's being changed, and more meritocracy, or I don't know, performance-based pay, which is a more Western approach, I guess, or Anglo-American approach, is getting introduced to some degree in a lot of these companies. And bonuses especially. So what used to be, everybody, if you join a company, everybody who joined together with you to have the same salary, basically, unless you become the executive position. And there wasn't much of a gap between the executive and the employees, or executive or the non-executive. But that's changing. On the flip side of this is you also have a very sharp increase in non-regular employment. Very serious issue in that it's all over the world. But in Japan, this trend of hiring people just for short-term contract, 2 years, 5 years maximum, many more people and many more different industry jobs, it's allowed to hire people on contract basis. So in 1990, only about 20% of the whole labor force were in state quota. Now it's 35% in 2011, and now it's about 43%. 43% of the workforce have no permanent job. After 2 years or 5 years, they have to renew the contract, or they get fired. This is massively important. They say Japan's unemployment is very low globally, yes, but if you think of this, what effect it has on society, consumption patterns, on politics, you have to consider quite seriously. Why? Well, there's a change to labor laws in 2003. Well, not just that, but one of the major events, making it easier for different kinds of companies. It used to be just certain kind of industry you're allowed to have contract labor. Now it's expanded to all sorts of different industries. So there's also a change in mentality and attitudes on how to run a company. Back in the 80s and 70s, I don't know, early 90s, all the talk about was that Japanese companies are run for their stakeholders. They run for the shain and shōshisha, okyakusan, and also for the kabunushi. So these are different. In the English, the shareholders who own the company's shares, the workers, and also society in general, the consumers. These are all important. And those are the stakeholders. And you have to think of all three. That increasingly becomes, let's focus on the shareholders' benefits. Don't worry so much about the employees. Don't worry so much about society in general. Okay? So, shareholder values. Kabunushi, not, what stakeholder in Japanese, but kabunushi joshi. So what does it do? It drives companies to focus on increasing, not just profit, but short-term profit, increasing dividend, haito, increasing the share price. This may come at the cost of firing people, or well, of course they won't. They will never say we do everything for the sake of the shareholder. But when you read company PR statements, investor relations, there's less and less talk, and more talk about shareholder value. Okay, because there's a pressure. There's a changing attitude. Not all companies.
May
Yeah.
isn't shareholder and stakeholder the same thing?
No, stakeholder is a much broader definition. Shareholder is just those who actually own shares. Stakeholder are those who are involved in a company and
So
have
it
some
might
stakes.
include the employees. No, employees.
Some employees have shares.
Yeah, but like even if they don't have any shares, that they might be viewed as stakeholders.
They're stakeholders. Employees are stakeholders.
Mm.
Consumers are stakeholders. The society, the community in which the company is a stakeholder.
Oh,
But they're not a shareholder. So what's happening is this Anglo-American style of capitalism, where you focus on the shareholder. It's not, simplistically put, as opposed to the broader, all the other people that are affected. So it used to be in Japan, the company, the president will say the company exists for the shain. Shainのために会社が存在する. Very simplistically argued. But nowadays, it's not for shain, it's for creating kabunushi no kachi, which means increasing the share price, increasing haito. That's very different. That's kind of an import from Anglo-American. Okay, any questions? Jumping around a bit. What else happens? Part of this effect of having less job security, people on contract labor, is inequality, right? And the book goes into it a little bit, not very effectively, but the top 20% of income earners earn six times more than the bottom 20%. And this is an increase from 5 years ago. Poverty index, those who are kinko ritsu, of course, increases, and it's worse in the OECD after the US. And kinko ritsu of children, the children's poverty rate, those who are under a certain income level, becomes worst children's poverty rate. And I will go into this a bit more detail. Regional inequalities, my favorite topic. The difference between city and rural areas, Chiho and Toshi, increases in terms of income, in terms of job opportunities. This is Gini Keisu. Who knows what Gini Keisu is? Who knows what Gini Keisu is? Gini coefficient. No Keizai gakusha here? No economist? Yes, good. What is the Gini coefficient? Someone explain to us. Yes, somebody back there. Yeah, measure of statistical dispersion intended to represent the income distribution of a nation's residents. Well, not just a nation, any sample. And it's the most commonly used measure of inequality. If you have 0 Gini coefficient, that's perfect equality. Everybody has the same income. Or you can measure it by asset, how much assets you have, how much savings. Or it could be measured, if it's 1, it's perfect inequality. I have everything, you have 0. Okay? You see here, you have the Gini Keisu, US, UK, Italy, Japan, Canada, red is Japan, I don't know what this is, Korea, France, Germany, Sweden. All the countries are going up. Okay, I think there are very few countries where Gini coefficient is going down. Does anybody know any cases of countries where equality is increasing? No? I think for a while Brazil had shrinking Gini coefficient. But generally speaking, all the mature economies, inequality is increasing. This is something you should focus on if you're concerned about the world. In Japan too, it's gone up. Japan is, along with US and UK, Anglo-American societies, higher Gini coefficient, higher inequality. And they have diverged from the other countries to some degree. Japan has gone up. So in the OECD countries, Japan is among the higher than average. Not the highest, but high. China is much worse. India much worse, but among the developed economies. Even in Sweden, you see, very equal society, but gone up. Denmark too, I think, is gone up. Okay? So this is up to 2015, it's about flat. This is after redistribution. So after the government takes taxes and then spreads it around. This is a clear sign of increasing inequality, which macro statistics. There are all these smaller statistics you can see. The big numbers. Okay. There's also this perception. As I said, perception is as important as reality. The perception of income inequality. This book came out, was it 2005 or something? Yamada Matahiro was a sociologist called Hibo Katsu Shakai. In other words, it's not just real people's incomes are diverging, it's people's feelings about their future is diverging. We talked about how Japan was a mass middle class society. Everybody thought they were middle class, part of middle class. But in this period, more and more people think they're not part of the middle class. What happens? People talk about kachigumi and makegumi, winners and losers. This phrase is not really talked about now. It's like Joryu Shimin or Tagyu Shimin, but this sort of thing it wasn't really talked about in the 80s, 70s. Okay? Now, it's become a common description. So anxiety of future job chances, and this is of course tied into your job security, right? And whether you have a full-time job, whether you work for a big company, all these things. This creates anxiety, perception of a stratified society, stratified class society, which is re-emerging, and underclass, Karyu Shakai. And this is basically become the new normal. It was not really normal in the early 90s, but now everybody accepts it almost. Right? not accept, but it becomes less discussed because it's understandable, or it's nothing new. People get normalized. This is a very dangerous thing about people. They get used to things. You get used to Trump doing crazy things, or you get used to the idea of homeless on the streets. You get used to some people having much more money than others, or much better education. Very quick. People get used to anything. Connected to this, and perhaps key to understanding why this replicates, is education. This is kind of a separate idea, but there's more and more focus on private education. And getting into the right universities, getting into the right schools has always been a theme in Japanese education. But this idea that those who have more money, families that have more money, they send their children to better cram schools. They can afford very expensive cram school, juku. And that gives families, children in higher income families, better chance to go to better high school and go to better university. Okay? And in the lower income areas, you have these problems of gakuhokai and teachers unable to control classrooms, a kind of crisis, general sense of crisis. Public education isn't working. You're seeing unequal chances of children depending on their background. And you can see, statistically, depending on your income level of your parents, whether you can go to a university of 4 years or if you work. If you're on less than 4 million yen, about 30% go to university, 30% work. But if you get richer and richer, fewer people go to work, more and more people go to university, obviously. Why is that? Well, it's probably because parents can afford to send the children to a 4-year university, which has become more and more expensive. National universities too, even Todai, the prices come up, right? But also, parents who are wealthy, they're probably well educated, and they think the chance of their children to succeed is to get better education. So it's not just how much money you have, but also attitude. And that replicates itself. It's Saisei Sansu Kasa. Okay? It's one of the worst kind of situations. I think it's a really bad idea, but it's debatable. You could say this is the natural order of things. Okay. And also, discussions in the last decades, a very pessimistic view, I think it's a bit overdone, is that Japanese students are very inward-looking. In the 80s and 70s, they all wanted to go abroad. They wanted to try different things. But now, a lot of young people are not going overseas. They're not trying to challenge or do new things. They're only thinking about how to get a secure job. And not just that, of course, criticize for the quality of the education. They're not global enough, not enough English education. And you can see the number of people who go to the US, Japan, like 20,000, 40,000, 60,000. Chinese, Indians, Koreans, far more going to US. Now, what's the problem with this statistic? This shows that total number of Japanese students or Chinese students who go abroad to the US to study. By year, this is by tens of thousands. So about 40,000. Slow decline. What's wrong with this statistic? Yes?
Well, those are absolute numbers, and
Yeah.
not relative to like the total population.
Exactly. What happened to the total population of Japanese students? They're shrinking. So if you do by per capita, maybe it's flat. Or maybe. So it's a bit of a problematic statistic. You see this a lot in a lot of newspapers and people complaining that young Japanese students are not ambitious. But it could be also because it's too expensive to go abroad. It could be also that there's very terroristy abroad. That's the right word to use. Different reasons. But I think there's also, compared to, say, China, India, South Korea, when I go abroad, or when I was in England, or even whenever I go abroad to conferences, there's far more of these Chinese, Korean, South Korean students abroad. The Japanese student population in foreign universities shrinking. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It's not very clear 100%, but it certainly is a change. Okay, so this is some changes in the trends in education. And you can see overall a sense of shrinking and contraction in the mobility. How about in terms of family economy? This relates to women in the workplace. But as contract work is increasing, you also see more and more women entering into the workforce. Okay? The number of female workers in the workforce has increased. I don't have the statistics here, and many of them continue to be safe put. But the problem is, women work, men work, and a lot of the men have non-regular contract work. The problem is that they don't have enough money, or they don't have enough security to get married and to have families. One of the main reasons why women don't get married, as the opinion polls and statistics show it out, is that they're concerned about their economic situation, especially if the husband's salary is low, or they don't have a regular job. And this shows that if you are a man and you are not Hiseki, so the red is Hiseki, huh? This is those who don't have regular jobs. If you're 20, 94% of people in the 20s, if you're regular, non-contract, contract job, you won't get married, 94%. If you're 30, 75% don't get married. In the 40s, about 45% don't get married, 9%. This is a bit of a different generation. But what it shows is that if you don't have a regular job, you don't get married, or your chance of getting married is much lower. Whereas for women, it's not as severe. If you have a regular job, a contract job, you still get married at a certain age. So non-regular workers half as likely as to get married. So you have this situation where you're not getting this traditional model, so-called breadwinner model. It's kind of weird because Japanese don't eat so much bread. It should be the rice winner model. Of the man goes to work outside, has a full-time job, brings home money, the wife stays at home, they raise kids. And now that system model breaks down. Men and women both work, both have less possibility of having full-time jobs, and because of that, they're not getting married, or even if they get married, they don't have children. This problem really accelerates in the 90s and 2000s. Okay, so this kind of situation aggravates, of course, the depopulation or the Shoshikoreka Mondai. Okay, so that's another trend. Let's see how much time. I see, we still have time. Okay, we'll talk about gender equality. Right. Well, this we'll talk about in more detail in a separate class. But during this period, the issue of getting more women's representation in politics, or getting more women in the workplace at the equal conditions, same conditions as men, they do some things, but it doesn't really make such an impact. They passed the Danjo Todo Sankaku, I guess, 1999, all kinds of trying to make legal changes so that it encourage women into the workplace, encourage women to have more positions of responsibility. But it doesn't really have teeth. It doesn't punish companies. It doesn't punish organizations that don't increase women's representation. For example, the number of managers in companies, it increases, definitely, more and more. It reaches 10% in 2004, maybe a bit higher later on, but the overall women's wages, the salaries compared to men, remain 20-30% less on average, and much lower than other more advanced countries in Western Europe, advanced in terms of women and men equality. And we'll go into this a bit more detail. Why? Why is it that it's so difficult for women to balance work and family raising in Japan, and why this kind of discrimination persists? When you look at the world of politics, the imbalance is worse. And one of the worst countries in terms of female representation, this is for the parliament, so the lower house, the number of women in parliament is about 10%, 8%. Changes. So this is much lower than a lot of countries. The ranking, I guess, is 100 out of 150 countries. Very low. Countries like Taiwan, countries like, well, some African countries have very high women participation rates in parliament. And local politics too, although a bit higher in local politics, like 15-20%, depending on the cities. Now you have a Tokyo governor that's a woman, so that might be a change, but we'll see. Here we go, here are some statistics on gender pay gap. This is 2008, I think it's improved somewhat. The idea that if you compare men and women's salaries, in general, women earn on the same kind of job situation. Women earn less, even in Sweden, even in a country like Denmark. I think the gender gap in pay in Japan is very, very high in terms of this gap. Number of women in management positions. America, Germany, UK, above 30%, Sweden 30%, but in Japan only 10% of women in managerial positions. Why? Well, there's all kinds of cultural, institutional reasons, which we can go into in another class. But the situation hasn't really improved dramatically over the last 20 years, despite some attempts to change the laws and discussion, constant discussion about some discussion about this problem. Okay. Recently, Abenomics talked about womanomics, get women into the workplace. We'll see how effective that is. I don't think there hasn't been much substantial improvements. So what happens is women get sick and tired of the Japanese corporate place and they go abroad. So I was taking an airplane back from Frankfurt, and sitting next to me was a 30-year-old young Japanese woman. We were talking, and she said, well, I work for this big shosha in Japan, and I was oeru, and it was really too much. So now I'm going to go to Germany. Now I'm very happy. Well, she didn't say I'm very happy, but she seemed very happy to be working in Frankfurt. So there's a brain drain, I think, an important brain drain of very, very capable, educated, talented women leaving Japan because the corporate world here is too much. So this is another potentially serious problem when your most talented people can't find a satisfying job situation at home. Not just women, I think men too. Okay. This is an index of equality between men and women, ranking by the World Economic Forum. It's a bit old, but unfortunately it's quite low. And I don't think it's really improved very much. And Japan is always in the media, in the global media, people saying, why is the women's situation so poor in terms of corporate world or political world? It's a continuing problem. Okay. Oh, here we go, womenomics. There has been a move towards encouraging more women into the workplace. Why? Because the population is shrinking, workforce is shrinking, we need more workers. So, even the conservatives, like Abe and the LDP, are saying we can't have women staying at home and just being housewives. We need them to be out in the workplace. And of course, there's pressure from the business community to encourage this, create a situation where talented women stay. And there's also interesting discussion that in countries where women's participation rate in the labor market is high, the birth rate is also high. Right? It's not, a lot of the conservatives said, if women go to work, we're going to have less and less babies. But globally, if you compare countries like France or the Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, women's participation rate is very high in the workforce. They work as much as men, generally speaking. At the same time, the birth rate is also high. So why? Whereas other countries, Japan, South Korea, Spain, Italy, very low women's participation rate. But also very low birth rate. So what are the women who are not working and not raising children doing at home? Well, they might not be married, or they just have one child, I don't know, no child. So this new argument, combined with womenomics, we need to have women in the workplace because the workforce is shrinking. But also having women in the workforce will improve chances of them having babies. So the condition is you have to have a support system. You need to have place to show, you need to have all these nurseries and whatnot. Okay, we'll talk about that in a separate class. I'm just sort of giving an overview of all these things that we need to go into more detail. End of breadwinner model, that is rice winner model. I think it's clearly here already. The idea that it should be only the man who goes out to work, makes money for the family, and the woman stays home, I think is very rare. I think it's only for very lucky families that the husband is the only man working. Only men who have very good job conditions, secure and high salary. Not only, but I think that's the trend. So if you are shufu, saying you're shufu, then you're kind of an aristocrat. Most families, they have to work, both man and woman work, even though they're married and have kids. Those who can succeed in doing double income working together and also getting their kids into hoikuen and whatnot, that's one model. Another model, of course, is not working, not getting married at all, not having any children at all. And that cohort, that group is growing, obviously with damaging effect in terms of birth rates. Of course, I'm saying this with a very strong premise, right? That you need to have more children, you need to have a high fertility rate. One can also make the argument, and I think I will ask you to make this argument, is that it's good Japan's population is shrinking. Why not? It's very crowded all the time. People create environmental stress. So I think obsessing and saying, oh, the population is shrinking, our economy is getting smaller, everybody's going to get unhappy is very simplistic, and it's kind of not the whole picture. You can have countries with very small population but very wealthy. So Nordic countries, only 10 million, 5 million, but they're very wealthy. I don't know. Singapore, very small population, very wealthy. But the fact that the biggest problem I think is if you ask couples, or not even non-couples, how many children would you want? The average response is 2, 2.5, 2.2. Most people want to have 2 children, but they can't do it. Why? Because the job and the nursing situation and economic conditions don't allow it. So that's the big problem. Okay, so we went through a lot of things. I said I wasn't going to lecture, but I ended up lecturing anyway. Can't say it. But I hope you got some idea of the things that were happening in the 90s, 2000s, bigger trends. And the book will cover in more detail what I talked about. Because they all interact with each other. You can already see, right? Job security, family life, education quality, growing perception of insecurity. They all come together, feed each other. I've given a very pessimistic account, right? I could probably make a more upbeat and happy picture of this time. But it has this kind of cumulative effect. And the perception from outside of Japan and inside Japan is that it was all these problems weren't resolved, and they became bigger and bigger like a snowball. and the crisis situation, I guess, 2009, 2012, it was a turning point. And you have these trends feeding into politics, and politics also responding to these trends in different ways. And I'll talk about politics next week, because a lot of people say nothing's changing, nothing has changed, or no reforms were done. But actually, 90s to 2000, there were all kinds of dramatic change in politics. You don't see it in the surface, but the situation we have now with Abe dominant, and the situation we have in terms of the relationship with bureaucrats, relationship with business, well, a lot of it results from the 90s, obviously, and changes then. So, next week I want you to read chapter 17, page 322-335. Okay? We got that? 17, 322-335. And then I will upload an article by Machidori Sensei, who's the professor here of politics, called Behind Japan's Turmoil. It's in English. It's a very good summary of all these different things that happened in the 90s and 2000s. Okay? Don't worry about the presentation questions. We can read it and think about the ideas. So I will upload this article. Actually, you can go to the website. I will upload these notes to classes. Okay? And then you can go to the link. Clear? And read it. Because the pop quiz might happen anytime. I forgot to say, next week I'm not here. I'm in Germany. So, Kyuko, no class next week. So you have time to prepare. So I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Okay? No class next week. Kyuko. 2 weeks, I'll see you. So please read, please catch up. Pop quiz can happen anytime. If you want to borrow a book, I didn't bring it, but who has my book? Good? Anybody else? Yeah? You have my book. Does anybody want to borrow the textbook today? Anybody? No? Who wants to borrow it? So can you give it to him? Bring up the textbook. And then if you want to borrow, come on. Okay, so any questions? What's the time?